to our weekly reading of Krsna book to Srila Prabhupada. We've had 2 weeks of separation from our service because Srila Prabhupada's rooms have been renovated for the glorious 50th anniversary of Srila Prabhupada opening the Vrindavan Temple 1975 on Ram Navami. Now it's 2025, 50 years later. So as we always do, let us offer respectful obeisances to Srila Prabhupada and to each other. Namo Vishnuvadaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pacharane Nirvasesha Sunyavadi Paskachadi Chatarane. To each other, Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Bhyevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. So we're, as I was saying before, we're in the prayers by the personified Vedas, the very long chapter, and if we're about halfway through. Those of you online, you can follow the subtitles below the page, and that makes it easier for you to follow along. The paragraph begins with, the creation of the material world can therefore be taken as one of the pastimes of the Lord. It is called one of the Lord's pastimes because he creates this material world whenever he desires. This desire of the Supreme Personality of Godhead is also extreme mercy on his part because it gives the conditioned souls another chance to develop their original consciousness and thus go back home, back to Godhead. Therefore, no one can blame the Supreme Lord for creating this material world.
From the subject matter under discussion, we can gain a clear understanding of the difference between the impersonalist and the personalist. The impersonal conception recommends merging into the existence of the Supreme, and the voidist philosophy recommends making all material varieties void. Both these philosophers are known as Mayavad. Certainly, the cosmic manifestation comes to a close and becomes void when the living entities merge into the body of Narayan to rest until another creation. And this may be called an impersonal condition. But these conditions are never eternal. The cessation of the variegatedness of the material world and the merging of the living entities into the body of the Supreme are not permanent because the creation will take place again, and the living entities who merged into the body of the Supreme without having developed their Krishna consciousness will again appear in this material world when there is another creation. The Bhagavad Gita confirms the fact that this material world is created and annihilated perpetually, and that conditioned souls without Krishna consciousness come back again and again. Whenever the material creation is manifest, if such conditioned souls take advantage of this opportunity and develop Krishna consciousness under the direct instruction of the Lord, then they are transferred to the spiritual world and do not have to come back to the material creation. It is said, therefore, that the voidists and the impersonalists are not very intelligent because they do not take shelter under the lotus feet of the Lord. Because they are less intelligent, these voidists and impersonalists take two different types of austerities, either to attain the stage of nirvana, which means finishing the material conditions of life, or to attain oneness by merging into the body of the Lord. All of them again fall down because they neglect the lotus feet of the Lord.
In the Chaitanya Charitamrita, the author Krishnadasa Kaviraja Goswami, after studying all the Vedic literatures and hearing from all authorities has given his opinion that Krishna is the only supreme master and that all living entities are his eternal servants. His statement is confirmed in the prayers by the personified Vedas. The conclusion is therefore that everyone is under the control of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Everyone is serving under the supreme direction of the Lord, and everyone is afraid of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. It is out of fear of Him that activities are rightly executed. Everyone's position is to be subordinate to the Supreme Lord, yet the Lord has no partiality in His view of the living entities. He is just like the unlimited sky, as his view of the living entities. He is just like the unlimited sky, as the sparks of the fire dance in the fire. Similarly, all living entities are like birds flying in the unlimited sky of the Supreme Lord. Some of them are flying very high, some are flying at a lower altitude, and some are flying at a still lower altitude. The different birds are flying in different positions according to their respective abilities, but the sky has nothing to do with this ability. In the Bhagavad Gita, the Lord confirms that He awards different positions to different living entities in proportion to their surrender. This proportionate reward by the personality of Godhead to the living entities is not partiality. Therefore, in spite of the living entities always being under the control of the Supreme Personality of Godhead in their different positions, spheres and species of life, He is never responsible for their different living conditions. It is foolish and artificial, therefore, to think oneself equal to the Supreme Lord, and it is still more foolish to think that one has not seen God. Everyone is seeing God according to his capacity. The only difference is that the theist sees God as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the most beloved Krishna, and the atheist sees the absolute truth as ultimate death.
The personified Vedas continued to pray. Dear Lord, they said, from the all Vedic information, it is understood that you are the supreme controller and all living entities are controlled. Both the Lord and the living entities are called Nitya, eternal, and so are qualitatively one. Yet the singular Nitya or the Supreme Lord is the controller, whereas the plural Nityas are controlled. The individual controlled living entity resides within the body, and the Supreme Controller as Supersoul is also present there, but the Supersoul controls the individual soul. That is the verdict of the Vedas. If the individual soul were not controlled by the Supersoul, then how could one explain the Vedic version that a living entity transmigrates from one body to another and enjoys or suffers the effects of his past deeds, sometimes being promoted to a higher standard of life and sometimes being degraded to a lower standard. Thus, the conditioned souls are not only under the control of the Supreme Lord but are also conditioned by the control of material nature. This relationship of the living entities with the Supreme Lord as the controlled and the controller definitely proves that although the Super Soul is all pervasive, the individual living entities are never all pervasive. If the individual souls were all pervasive, there would be no question of their being controlled. The theory that the supersoul and the individual soul are equal is therefore a polluted conclusion, and no sensible person accepts it. Rather, one should try to understand the distinctions between the Supreme Eternal and the subordinate eternals.
The personified Vedas therefore concluded, O Lord, you are the unlimited eternal, Dhruva, and the living entities are the limited eternals. The form of the unlimited eternal is sometimes conceived as the universal form, and in Vedic literatures like the Upanishads, the form of the limited eternal is vividly described. It is said therein that the original spiritual form of the living entity is 1/10,000th the size of the tip of a hair. It is also stated that spirit is greater than the greatest and smaller than the smallest. The individual living entities who are eternally part and parcel of God are smaller than the smallest. With our material senses, we can perceive neither the Supreme, who is greater than the greatest, nor the individual soul, who is smaller than the smallest. From the authoritative sources of Vedic literature, we have to understand both him who is greater than the greatest and him who is smaller than the smallest. The Vedic literature states that the Supersoul is sitting within the heart of every living entity's body and is as big as a thumb. Therefore, the argument may be put forward, how can something the size of a thumb be accommodated within the heart of an ant? The answer is that this thumb measurement of the Supersoul is imagined in proportion to the body of the living entity. In no circumstance, therefore, can the Supersoul and the individual living entity be taken as one, although both of them enter within the material body of a living entity. The Supersoul lives within the heart to direct or control the individual living entity. Although both are Dhruva or eternal, the living entity is always under the direction of the Supreme.
It may be argued that because the living entities are born of the material nature, they are all equal and independent. In the Vedic literature, however, it is said that the Supreme Personality of Godhead impregnates the material nature with the living entities and then they come out. Therefore, the appearance of individual living entities is not factually due to material nature alone, just as a child produced by a woman is not her independent production. A woman is first impregnated by a man, then a child is produced. As such, the child produced by the woman is part and parcel of the man. Similarly, the living entities are apparently produced by the material nature, but not independently. It is due to the impregnation of the material nature by the Supreme Father that the living entities are present. Therefore, the argument that the individual living entities are not parts and parcels of the Supreme cannot stand. For example, the different parts of the body cannot be taken as equal to the whole. Rather, the whole body is the controller of the different limbs. Similarly, the parts and parcels of the Supreme Whole are always dependent and are always controlled by the source of the parts and parcels. It is confirmed in the Bhagavad Gita that the living entities are parts and parcels of Krishna. Mamai vanchaha. No sane man, therefore, will accept the theory that the supersoul and individual soul are of the same category. They are equal in quality, but quantitatively, the soul is always the supreme and the individual soul is always the subordinate to the supersoul. That's the conclusion of the Vedas.
The significant word used in this connection is Yanmaya or Chinmaya. In Sanskrit grammar, the word mayat is used in the sense of transformation. and also in the sense of fullness. The Mayavadi philosophers interpret that the word, Srila Prabhupada, interpret that the word Yanmaya or Chinmaya indicates that the living entity is always equal to the Supreme. But one has to consider whether this affix, mayat, is used for fullness or for transformation. The living entity never possesses anything exactly in the same proportion as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Therefore, this mayat affix cannot be used to mean that the individual living entity is quantitatively equal with the Lord. The individual living entity never has full knowledge. Otherwise, how could he have come under the control of Maya or the material energy? The word fullness can be accepted, therefore, only in proportion to the magnitude of the living entity. The spiritual oneness of the Supreme Lord and the living entities is never to be accepted as homogeneity. Each and every living entity is individual. If homogenic oneness is accepted, then by the liberation of one individual soul, all other individual souls would have been liberated immediately. But the fact is that every individual soul is differently enjoying and suffering in the material world.
As mentioned above, the word mayat is also used in the sense of transformation. Sometimes it is also used to mean byproduct. The impersonalist theory is that Brahman himself has accepted different types of bodies and that this is his Leela or pastime. There are, however, many hundreds and thousands of species of life in different standards of living condition, such as human beings, demigods, animals, birds, and beasts, and if all of them were plenary expansion of the Supreme Absolute Truth, then there would be no question of liberation, because Brahman would already be liberated. Another interpretation put forward by the Mayavadis is that in every millennium, different types of bodies are manifest, and when the millennium is closed, all the different bodies or expansion of the Brahman automatically become one, ending all different manifestations. Then, in the next millennium, according to this theory, Brahman again expands in different bodily forms. If we accept this theory, then Brahman becomes subject to change. But this cannot be accepted. From the Vedanta Sutra, we understand that Brahman is by nature joyful. He cannot therefore change himself into a body which is subject to so many painful conditions. Actually, the living entities are infinitesimal parts and parcels of Brahman, and as such, they are prone to be covered by the illusory energy. As explained before, the particles of Brahman are like sparks blissfully dancing within a fire, but there is a chance of their falling from the fire to smoke. Although smoke is another condition of fire, this material world is just like the smoke, and the spiritual world is like a blazing fire. The innumerable living entities are prone to fall down to this material world from the spiritual world when influenced by the illusory energy. And it is also possible for the living entity to be liberated again when, by cultivation of real knowledge, he becomes completely freed from the contamination of the material world.
The theory of the Asuras is that the living entities are born of material nature or Prakriti in touch with the Purusha. This theory also cannot be accepted because both the material nature and the Supreme Personality of Godhead are eternally existing. Neither the material nature or the Supreme Personality of Godhead can be born. The Supreme Lord is known as Aja or unborn. Similarly, the material nature is called Aja. Both these terms, Aja and Aja mean unborn, because both the material nature and the Supreme Lord are unborn. It is not possible that they can beget the living entities, but it is accepted in the Vedic literature that as water in contact with air sometimes presents innumerable bubbles. So, a combination of the material nature and the Supreme Person causes the appearance of the living entities within this material world. As bubbles in the water appear in different shapes, the living entities also appear in the material world in different shapes and conditions, influenced by the modes of material nature. Therefore, it is not improper to conclude that the living entities appearing within this material world in different shapes, such as human beings, demigods, animals, birds, and beasts, all get their respective bodies due to different desires. No one can say when such desires were awakened in them, and therefore it is said Anadi karma, the cause of such material existence, is untraceable. No one knows when material life began, but it is a fact that it does have a point of beginning, because originally every living entity is a spiritual spark. As a spark falling onto the ground from a fire has a beginning, so a living entity coming to this material world has a beginning, but no one can say when. Even though during the time of dissolution, all the conditioned living entities remain merged within the spiritual existence of the Lord as if in deep sleep. Their original desires to lord it over the material nature do not subside. Again, when there is cosmetic manifestation, they come out to fulfill the same desires, and therefore they appear in different species of life.
The living entities merged into the Supreme at the time of dissolution are compared to honey. In the honeycomb, the taste of different flowers are conserved. When one drinks honey, one cannot distinguish that what sort of honey has been collected from what sort of flower, but the palatable taste of the honey presupposes that the honey is not homogeneous but is a combination of different tastes. Another example is that although different rivers ultimately mix with the water of the sea, this does not mean that the individual identities of the rivers are thereby lost. Although the water of the Ganges and the water of the Yamuna mix with the water of the sea, the river Ganges and river Yamuna still continue to exist independently. The merging of different living entities into Brahman at the time of dissolution involves the dissolution of different types of bodies, but the living entities, along with their different tastes, remain individually submerged in Brahman until another manifestation of the material world. As the salty taste of sea water and the sweet taste of Ganges water are different, and this different continuously exists, so the difference between the Supreme Lord and the living entities continuously exists, even though at the time of dissolution they appear to merge. The conclusion is, therefore, that even when the living entities become free from all contamination of material conditions and merge into the spiritual kingdom, their individual taste in relationship with the Supreme Lord continue to exist.
The personified Vedas continued. Dear Lord, it is therefore our conclusion that all living entities are attracted by your material energy, and that only due to their mistakenly identifying themselves as products of the material nature are they transmigrating from one kind of body to another in forgetfulness of their eternal relationship with you. Because of ignorance, these living entities misidentify themselves in different species of life, and especially when elevated to the human form of life. They identify with a particular class of men, or a particular nation, or race, or so called religion, forgetting their real identity as eternal servants of your Lordship. Due to this faulty conception of life, they are undergoing repeated birth and death. Out of many millions of them, if one becomes intelligent enough by associating with pure devotees, he comes to the understanding of Krishna consciousness and comes out of the jurisdiction of material misconception.
In the Chaitanya Charitamrita, it is confirmed by Lord Chaitanya that the living entities are wandering within this universe in different species of life, but that if one of them becomes intelligent enough by the mercy of the spiritual master and the Supreme Personality of Godhead Krishna, then he begins his devotional life in Krishna consciousness. It is said, Harim vina namritim taranti. Without the help of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, one cannot get out of the clutches of repeated birth and death. In other words, only the Supreme Lord, the Personality of Godhead, can relieve the conditioned souls from the cycle of repeated birth and death.
The personified Vedas continued. The influence of time, past, present, and future, and the material miseries such as excessive heat, excessive cold, birth, death, old age, and disease are all simply the movements of your eyebrows. Everything is working under your direction. It is said in the Bhagavad Gita that all material activity is going on under the direction of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna. The Vedas continue. All the conditions of material existence are opposing elements for persons who are not surrendered unto you. But for those who are surrendered souls and are in full Krishna consciousness, these things cannot be a source of fear. When Lord Nrsimhadev appeared, Prahlad Maharaj was never afraid of him, whereas his atheist father was immediately faced with death personified and was killed. Therefore, although Lord Nrsimhadev appears as death for an atheist like Hiranyakashipu, he is always kind and is the reservoir of all pleasure for the devotees like Prahlad. A pure devotee is not, therefore, afraid of birth, death, old age, and disease.
Sripad Sridhar Swami has composed a nice verse in this regard, the meaning of which is as follows. My dear Lord, I am a living entity perpetually disturbed by the conditions of material existence. I have been cracked to pieces by the smashing wheel of material existence, and because of my various sinful activities while existing in this material world, I am burning in the blazing fire of material reaction. Somehow or other, my dear Lord, I have come to take shelter under your lotus feet. Please accept me and give me protection. Srila Narottam Das Thakur also prays like this. My dear Lord, O son of Nanda Maharaj, associated with the daughter of Vrishabhanu, I have come to take shelter under your lotus feet after suffering greatly in the material conditions of life. And I pray that you please be merciful upon me. Please do not kick me away, for I have no other shelter than you.
The conclusion is that any process of self-realization or God realization other than Bhakti Yoga or devotional service is extremely difficult. Taking shelter of devotional service to the Lord in full Krishna consciousness is therefore the only way to become free from the contamination of material conditioned life, especially in this age. Those who are not in Krishna consciousness are simply wasting their time and they have no tangible proof of spiritual life. It is said by Lord Ramachandra, I always give confidence and security to anyone who surrenders unto me and decides definitely that he is my eternal servant, for that is my natural inclination. Similarly, Lord Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, the influence of the material nature is insurmountable. But anyone who surrenders unto me can verily overcome the influence of material nature. The devotees are not at all interested in arguing with the non-devotees to nullify their theories. Rather than wasting time, they always engage themselves in the transcendental loving service of the Lord in full Krishna consciousness.
The personified Vedas continued, Dear Lord, although great mystic yogis have full control over the elephant of the mind and the hurricane of the senses, unless they take shelter of bona fide spiritual master, they fall victim to the material influence and are never successful in their attempts at self-realization. Such unguided persons are compared to merchants going to sea on a ship without a captain. By one's personal attempts, therefore, one cannot get free from clutches of material nature. One has to accept a bona fide spiritual master and work according to his direction. Then it is possible to cross over nescience of material conditions. Sripad Sridhar Swami has composed a nice verse in this connection in which he says, O all merciful spiritual master, representative of Supreme Personality of Godhead, when my mind will be completely surrendered onto your lotus feet, at the time only by your mercy I shall be able to get relief from all obstacles to spiritual life, and I shall be situated in blissful life.
Actually, ecstatic samadhi or absorption in the Supreme Personality of Godhead can be achieved by constant engagement in His service. And in this constant engagement in devotional service can be performed only when works under the direction of a bona fide spiritual master. The Vedas therefore instruct that in order to know the science of devotional service, one has to submit himself unto the bona fide spiritual master. The bona fide spiritual master is he who knows the science of devotional service in disciplic succession. The disciplic succession is called Shrotriya. The prime symptom of one who has become a spiritual master in disciplic succession is that he is 100% fixed in bhakti yoga. Sometimes people neglect to accept a spiritual master and instead they endeavor for self-realization by mystic yoga practice. But there are many instances of failure even by great yogis like Vishwamitra. Arjun said in the Bhagavad Gita that controlling the mind is as impractical as stopping the blowing of a hurricane. Sometimes the mind is compared to a maddened elephant. Without following the direction of a spiritual master, one cannot control the mind and the senses. In other words, if one practices yoga mysticism and does not accept a bona fide spiritual master, he will surely fail. He will simply waste his valuable time. The Vedic injunction is that no one can have full knowledge without being under the guidance of an acharya. Acharyavan Purusho Veda. One who has accepted an acharya knows what is what. The absolute truth cannot be understood by arguments. One who has attained the perfect Brahminical stage naturally becomes renounced He does not strive for material gain because by spiritual knowledge he has come to the conclusion that in this world there is no insufficiency. Everything is sufficiently provided by Supreme Personality of Godhead. A real Brahmana, therefore, does not endeavor for material perfection. Rather, he approaches a bona fide spiritual master to accept orders from him. A spiritual master's qualification is that he is Brahmanishtha, which means that he has given up all other activities and has dedicated his life to working only for the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna. When a bona fide student approaches a bona fide spiritual master, he submissively prays to the spiritual master, "My dear Lord, kindly accept me as your student and train me in such a way that I will be able to give up all other process of self-realization and simply engage in Krishna consciousness, devotional service."
The devotee engaged by the direction of the spiritual master in the transcendental loving service of the Lord contemplates as follows. My dear Lord, you are the reservoir of pleasure. Since you are present, what is the use of the transient pleasure derived from society, friendship, and love? Persons unaware of supreme reservoir of pleasure falsely engage in deriving pleasure from sense gratification, but this is transient and illusory. In this connection with Vidyapati, a great Vaishnava devotee and poet, says, My dear Lord, undoubtedly there is some pleasure in the minds of society, friendship, and love, although it is materially conceived. But such pleasures cannot satisfy my heart, which is like a desert. In desert, there is need of an ocean of water, but if only a drop of water is poured on the desert, what is the value of such water? Similarly, our material hearts are full of multi desires, and which cannot be fulfilled by materialistic society, friendship, and love. When our hearts begin to derive pleasure from the supreme reservoir of pleasure, then we can be satisfied. That transcendental satisfaction is possible only in devotional service in full Krishna consciousness.
The personified Vedas continued, Dear Lord, you are Satchidananda Vigraha, the ever blissful form of knowledge, and because the living entities are part and parcels of your personality, their natural state of existence is to be fully conscious of you. In this material world, anyone who has developed such Krishna consciousness is no longer interested in the materialistic way of life. A Krishna conscious being becomes uninterested in family life where there is some concession for sense enjoyment. In other words, he is no longer interested in sense gratification. The perfection of human life is based on knowledge and renunciation, but it is very difficult to attempt to reach the state of knowledge and renunciation while in family life. Krishna conscious persons, therefore, take shelter of the association of devotees or sanctified places of pilgrimage. Such persons are aware of the relationship between the supersoul and the individual living entities, and they are never in the bodily concept of life, because they always carry you in full consciousness within their hearts. They are so purified that any place they go becomes a holy place of pilgrimage, and the water which washes their feet is able to deliver many sinful persons loitering within this material world. Jai Prabhupada.
When Prahlad Maharaj was asked by his atheistic father to describe something very good which he has learned, he replied to his father, For a materialistic person who is always full of anxieties, Due to being engaged in temporary and relative truths, the best course is to give up the blind veil of family life and go to the forest to take shelter of the Supreme Lord. Those who are actually pure devotees are celebrated as Mahatmas or great sages, personalities perfect in knowledge. They always think of the Supreme Lord and His lotus feet, and thus they automatically become liberated. Devotees who are always situated in that position become electrified by the inconceivable potencies of the Lord, and thus they themselves become the source of liberation for their followers and devotees. A Krishna conscious person is fully electrified spiritually, and therefore anyone who touches or takes shelter of such a pure devotee becomes similarly electrified with spiritual potencies. Such devotees are never puffed up with material opulences. Generally, the material opulences are good parentage, education, beauty, and riches. But although a devotee of the Lord may possess all four of these material opulences, he is never carried away by the pride of possessing such distinctions. Great devotees of the Lord travel all over the world from one place of pilgrimage to another, and on their way they meet many conditioned souls and deliver them by their association and distribution of transcendental knowledge. They generally reside in places like the Vrindavan, Mathura, Dwarka, Jagannath Puri, and Navadvip because only devotees assemble in such places. In this way, they give saintly association to one another and thus advance, so that every living entity can take advantage of the association of Krishna conscious persons. Such great devotees open temples and ashramas where Krishna's devotees assemble. By such association, people can develop more and more in Krishna consciousness. Such advancement is not possible in ordinary household life, which is devoid of Krishna consciousness.
The personified Vedas continued, Dear Lord, there are two classes of transcendentalists, the impersonalists and the personalists. The opinion of the impersonalists is that this material manifestation is false and that only the absolute truth is factual. The view of the personalists, however, is that the material world, although very temporary, is nevertheless not false but factual. Such transcendentalists have different arguments to establish the validity of their philosophies. Factually, the material world is simultaneously both truth and untruth. It is truth because everything is an expansion of the supreme absolute truth, and it is untruth because the existence of the material world is temporary. It is created and it is annihilated. Because of its different conditions of existence, the cosmic manifestation has no fixed position. Those who advocate acceptance of this material world as false are generally known by the maxim Brahma Satyam Jagam Mithya. They put forward the argument that everything in the material world is prepared from matter. For example, there are many things made of clay, such as earthen pots, dishes, and bowls. After their annihilation, these things may be transformed into many other material objects, but in all cases, their existence as clay continues. An earthen water jug, after being broken, may be transformed into a bowl or dish, but either as a dish, bowl, or water jug, the earth itself continues to exist. Therefore, the forms of the water jug, bowl, or dish are false, but their existence as yet is real. This is the impersonalist version. This cosmic manifestation is certainly produced from the absolute truth, but because its existence is temporary, it is false. The impersonalist understanding is that the absolute truth, which is always present, is the only truth. In the opinion of other transcendentalists, however, this material world being produced of the absolute truth is also truth. The materialists, the impersonalists argue that this is fallacious because it is sometimes found that matter is produced from spirit soul and sometimes that spirit soul is produced from matter. Such philosophers push forward the argument that although cow dung is dead matter, sometimes it is found that scorpions come out of cow dung. Similarly, dead matter like nails and hair comes out of the living body. Therefore, things produced of a certain thing are not always of the same quality as that thing. On the strength of this argument, Mayavadi philosophers try to establish that although this cosmic manifestation is certainly an emanation from the absolute truth, the cosmic manifestation does not necessarily have truth in it. According to this view, the absolute truth, Brahman, should therefore be accepted as truth, whereas the cosmic manifestation, although a product of the absolute truth, cannot be taken as truth.
The view of Mayavadi philosophers, however, is stated in the Bhagavad Gita to be the view of the asuras or demons. The Lord says in Bhagavad Gita, Ashtayam apratishtam te jagat ahur anishwaram aparaspara sambhutam kim anyat kama hetukam. The Asura's view of this cosmic manifestation is that the whole creation is false. The Asuras think that the mere interaction of matter is the source of the creation and there is no controller or God. But actually, this is not the fact. From the 7th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, we understand that the 5 gross elements, earth, water, fire, air, and sky, plus the subtle elements, mind, intelligence, and false ego, are 8 separated energies of the Supreme Lord. Beyond this inferior material energy is a spiritual energy known as the living entities. The living entities are accepted as the superior energy of the Lord. The whole cosmic manifestation is a combination of the inferior and superior energies. And the source of the energies is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The Supreme Personality of Godhead has many different types of energies. This is confirmed in the Vedas. Parasya Shaktir Vividheva Shuryate. The transcendental energies of the Lord are variegated, and because such varieties of energies have emanated from the Supreme Lord, they cannot be false. The Lord is ever existing, and the energies are ever existing. Some of the energy is temporary, sometimes manifested, and sometimes unmanifested. But this does not mean that it is false. The example may be given that when a person is angry, he does things which are different from his normal condition of life. But the fact that the mood of anger appears and disappears does not mean that the energy of anger is false. Therefore, the argument of the Mayavadi philosophers that this world is false is not accepted by the Vaishnava philosophers. The Lord Himself confirms that the view that there is no supreme cause of this material manifestation, that there is no God, and that everything is only the creation of the interaction of matter is a view of the Asuras.
The Mayavadi philosophers sometimes put forward the argument of the snake and the rope. In the dark of evening, a curled up rope is sometimes, due to ignorance, taken for a snake. But mistaking the rope for a snake does not mean that the rope or snake is false. Therefore, this example used by Mayavadis to illustrate the falsity of material world is not valid. When a thing is taken as fact, but actually has no existence at all, it is called false. But if something is mistaken for something else that exists, that does not mean it is false. The Vaishnava philosophers use a very appropriate example, comparing this material world to an earthen pot. When we see an earthen pot, it does not at once disappear and turn into something else. It may be temporary, but the earthen pot is not taken into use for bringing water, and we continue to see it as earthen pot. Therefore, although the earthen pot is temporary and different from the original earth, we cannot say that it is false. We should therefore conclude that the earthen pot and the entire earth are both truths, because one is the product of the other. We understand from Bhagavad Gita that after the dissolution of this cosmic manifestation, the material energy enters into the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The Supreme Personality of Godhead is ever existing with his varied energies. Because the material creation is an emanation from him, we cannot say that this cosmic manifestation is a product of something void. Krishna is not void. Whenever we speak of Krishna, he is present with his form, qualities, name, entourage, and paraphernalia. Therefore, Krishna is not impersonal. The original cause of everything is neither void nor impersonal, but is the Supreme Person. Demons may say that this material creation is Anishwara, without a controller or God, but such arguments ultimately cannot stand.
The example given by Mayavadi philosophers that inanimate matter like nails and hair come from the living body is not a very sound argument. Nails and hair are undoubtedly inanimate, but they come not from the animate living being, but from the inanimate material body. Similarly, the argument that the scorpion comes from the cow dung, meaning that a living entity comes from matter, is also unsound. The scorpion which comes out of the cow dung is certainly a living entity, but the living entity does not come out of the cow dung. Only the living entity's material body or the body of the scorpion comes out of the cow dung. The sparks of the living entities, as we understand from the Bhagavad Gita, are injected into material nature and then they come out. The body of the living entity in different forms is supplied by material nature, but the living entity himself is supplied by the Supreme Lord. The father and mother give the body necessary for the living entity under certain conditions. The living entity transmigrates from one body to another according to the different desires, which in the subtle form of intelligence, mind, and false ego accompany him from body to body. By superior arrangement, a living entity is put into the womb of a certain type of material body, and then he develops a similar body. Therefore, the spirit soul is not produced from matter. It takes on a particular type of body under superior arrangement. According to our present experience, this material body is a combination of matter and spirit. The spirit is moving the matter. The spirit soul, the living entity, and matter are different energies of the Supreme Lord. And since both the energies are products of the Supreme Eternal or the Supreme Truth, they are factual, not false, because the living entity is part and parcel of the Supreme. He exists eternally. Therefore, for him, there cannot be any question of birth or death. So-called birth and death occur because of the material body. The Vedic version, Sarvam Khal Idam Brahma, means that since both the energies have emanated from the Supreme Brahman, everything we experience is non-different from Brahman.
There are many arguments about the existence of this material world, but the Vaishnava philosophical conclusion is the best. The example of the earthen pot is very suitable. The form of this earthen pot may be temporary, but it has a specific purpose. The purpose of the earthen pot is to carry water from one place to another. Similarly, this material body, although temporary, has a special use. The living entity is given a chance from the beginning of the creation to evolve different kinds of material bodies according to the reserved desires he has accumulated from time immemorial. The human form of body is a special chance in which the developed form of consciousness can be utilized. Sometimes the Mayavadi philosophers push forward the argument that if this material world is truth, then why are householders advised to give up their connections with the material world and take sannyas? But the Vaishnava philosophers' view of sannyas is not that because the material world is false, one must therefore give up material activities. The purpose of Vaishnava sannyas is to utilize things as they are intended to be utilized. Srila Rupa Goswami has given transcendentalists two formulas for dealing with this material world. When a Vaishnava renounces the materialistic way of life and takes to sannyas, it is not on the conception of the falsity of the material world, but to devote himself fully to engaging. Oh Krishna. Where it is? But to devote himself fully to engaging everything in the service of the Lord. Srila Rupa Goswami therefore gives this formula: one should be unattracted to the material world because material attachment is meaningless. The entire material world, the entire cosmic manifestation belongs to God Krishna. Therefore, everything should be utilized for Krishna, and the devotee should remain unattached to material things. This is the purpose of Vaishnava sannyas. A materialist sticks to the world for sense gratification, but a Vaishnava sannyasi, although not accepting anything for his personal sense gratification, knows the art of utilizing everything for the service of the Lord. Srila Rupa Goswami has therefore criticized the Mayavadi sannyasis with his second formula. Because the Mayavadis do not know that everything has a utilization for the service of the Lord, they take the world to be false and falsely think they are liberated from the contamination of the material world. Since everything is an expansion of the energy of the Supreme Lord, the expansions are as real as the Supreme Lord is.
Time over. Time is up.
Okay, that concludes today's our Krishna book reading to Srila Prabhupada. Thank you, Srila Prabhupada, for allowing us to read the Krishna book to you. We'll pray to each other and Srila Prabhupada. Namo Vishnupadaya Krishna Peshtaya Bhutale Shrimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pashyata Deshatarine, and to each other. Mancha Kalpatarupyacha Krupa Sindhupa Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Hari Bol. Thank you, Srila Prabhupada. Thank you, Krishna Book. Jai Hari Bol.